Well, I finally finished Dracula. I've had this book since the 90s. So this book was printed in Canada in 1970. I've at least had this since the late 90s. I recall buying this from a thrift shop. I'm near certain of it. I don't know if any of you know what these 3-5s mean, or 5551. I'm not sure. This has been on my bookshelf for years, for decades. But this is a book that I distinctly remember. I was 16 years old, and this was somewhere in the mid 90s. Again, always aging myself. And I remember having downloaded this book when the internet wasn't even in households. I remember it being a text file on some BBS or early era internet, the 94 to 96 era internet, which was available in schools and governments, but it rolled out commercially to households in somewhere around 96. Why would I remember that kind of stuff? Because I remember being an early adopter in high school, and that's how I would access the internet. And my love for the internet and all things digital started previously to that. I ran my own BBS, for example, when I was a young teenager. Again, proto-internet days. This was in the public domain, so it was legal. It was a legal grab. That's where I got Dracula.txt. This is my distinct memory. I printed out the entire novel in the evenings while running the video yearbook. So yes, when video was still a thing it was analog, not digital, like we do today, like I'm doing right now. No, you had to put VHS cassettes into things and edit. In any case, while I was editing, I was printing off a few pages at a time throughout the entire term until I had the entire Dracula.txt file printed out. But I did jam the printer a few times, and then I eventually got caught, but I didn't admit to it. In any case, that's my long history of Dracula, and I had read through the first part of this, and I recall it very, very well. The Jonathan Harker part that gets to Castle Dracula, and then there's the whole, we'll get to it when I get into the review. I remember going to the movies, younger than I should have been, to watch the 1992 movie of Bram Stoker's Dracula. That was the one with Gary Oldman. Gary Oldman did a great freaking job in that movie. Winona Ryder, Keanu Reeves was in there. Man, that was a huge cast, man. Anthony Hopkins, man, that was a great movie. So I had memories of scenes that happened in this novel that allowed me to paint a picture of what was going on here better than the novel did. And I'll get into that when we start breaking down the review into 4 parts. So I like to be cognizant of what part I'm reading, Act 1, Act 2A, Act 2B, and Act 3, because there's certain patterns that exist during those parts of the narrative, and so I like to analyze whether or not those hit the mark. Past stories aside, let's get into the review, because that's why you're all here. I did have to take notes, otherwise I would never be able to stay on track, as you've seen in the first few minutes of this video. Dracula is, of course, a classic. Everyone knows what Dracula is. It informs so many other literature, movie, like media, just in general. Like, everyone knows what Dracula is, right? This is a staple of classic literature. Is it amazing? Not as amazing as I imagined I remembered. How about that? How about that statement? It's a bit of a mixed bag, because the opening with Jonathan Harker getting to Transylvania, to Castle Dracula, and then having those interactions with Dracula, they were just so goddamn creepy. They were amazing. The pacing was amazing. All of those encounters, man, that was absolutely a 5 out of 5. Like, this, it would have been a highly recommend. It was effectively the first quarter of the book, what I consider the Act 1 transition phase into Act 2. It's around the 25% mark, and so I was kind of paying attention to that, and the way it ended, I was like, wow, that seemed very final. And I don't remember being final because I know this character isn't dead. And I put this book down for about a month and a half at that point. I don't know why I didn't want to keep reading it beyond that point, but maybe there was something from like my teenage brain from 94 to 96. It was probably around 95 when I printed off that Dracula.txt. Maybe I read up to that part. And what I remember past that is actually my memory of the 1992 movie. That's what I'm thinking happened. And everything about that first act, the slow burn, the odd interactions between Jonathan Harker and Dracula, the eerie, creeping dread, like Jonathan running into the 3 brides, like finding out that there's something else going on. It was so prevalent in the first act, and it had me captivated. I read it all in one sitting, which I can't say happened for the next 3/4 of the book. This is hard because I wanted to really love this book. So I want to be sensitive to those who have fond memories of this, but I'm going to try to be as transparent as possible about the parts that I didn't like, but also the parts I really loved. Act 1 was a 5 out of 5. The rest of the novel was a 3 out of 5. They kind of balanced out the parts I really didn't like. And anyways, a 3 went to a 4. That's the grading. In case you don't want to hear me belabor the points along the way, I will have to say that this is absolutely going to be a spoiler-filled review. I'm just going to assume that at this point, people who are watching this video just want to hear what someone else's experience was like reading this book to see if maybe it correlates with some of your memories memories about it, I certainly didn't think that I would have had the thoughts I had after finishing this damn book. Am I disappointed for having read it? Absolutely not. And we'll get into all of this stuff. I'm trying to be as cohesive as possible, people. It's very difficult for me. Okay, there's just a lot of stuff going through my head. The longer I took to get to recording this video, the more I realized it was going to be more difficult for me to pull this off. I really should have talked about this as soon as I finished reading it. It was past midnight. I was struggled to get through Act 3, which we'll get into. I was drifting asleep in what should have been the most climactic part of this novel. I struggled so hard to get through the last 100 pages or so of this book. And I mean, we'll get into it. Okay, there's going to be a bunch of spoilers in this. If you haven't read the book, please read it first and then come back and check it out. I'm sure that there'll be a lot of stuff that we can talk about in the comments below, and maybe I'll learn like other people's takes that weren't similar to mine, and maybe I just read it different. Like I came at it with a different perspective 30 years later. I'm not sure what to tell you folks. So like I said in the first part, Stoker's use of atmosphere was flawless. Okay, the simplest of details and descriptions in Jonathan Harker's journal while he was in that odd dynamic with Dracula was just fascinating. It was everything I expected out of a gothic horror tale, and where I suspected all of the influence came from any gothic influenced literature that I read, or gaming products, or video games, or whatever. Like I felt like this book was where that spirit came from, and it really, really was in the first act. If the novel maintained that energy all the way through, oh man, it would have been an absolute 5 out of 5, as I said earlier on. I really wish it could have stayed there. Now let me start to break down the parts where I felt like it was unraveling. Once we shift to London, we get introduced to the other characters that are all going to be having their own kind of singular narratives via journals and news clippings and reports and whatever. That's what I found fascinating about the storytelling of this book, is that it does it in an unconventional way. I mean, I've seen it done in modern days, and I've seen other versions of this. I felt like this is the earliest example of it that I've seen. And so I was really fascinated by the way it all stitched together. I forget there's a term for it, but I forget what the term is right now. As we jump these POVs of Mina, of Lucy, of Dr. Sayward, Renfield, my favorite character in the book. I'll get into it. And then, of course, Van Helsing eventually comes into the picture. Jonathan Harker comes back into the picture. We got Quincy, which is kind of like a sub-character, which I wish there was more time spent on Quincy. Usually this American. Oh my God, there's so much to get into. It's going to unravel fast for me because I can't seem to stay on track. I literally have the notes right in front of me. In any case, let's get to the Lucy part of where this all starts to break down. I was still in slow burn mode where I was like, this is early Act 2, so we're kind of entering the journey phase, and this is going to be a slower pacing because Gothic literature, and that's just a staple of the time of this kind of storytelling. And so I was in for it. And because I had just come off of that, not to keep going back to Act 1, I just came off of that crazy high of that type of storytelling. I was like, it's all going to get us some good mood, because then it's going to swing around, and the polarity of it all is going to make us feel that dread that comes from Gothic horror. Maybe like sprinkling in some details about the influence of Dracula in London, and like maybe these newspapers would be talking about things, or we'd be hearing stories of people talking about things, people missing, or they, like, I just felt like there could have been a lot more scatterings of these little events that were happening around London while we were getting the marriage proposal subplots of Lucy and Mina, their exchanges with each other. Very endearing. It was very good. It was very good. Don't get me wrong. But it was all very much archetypical, I suppose. Like every character sort of had this one note direction that they were going in. And every time you went into their POV, you're like, are we talking about this again? That's how I felt. I shouldn't be talking about anyone else. We just went through a chapter of you telling me these feelings. And Bram Stoker evolves it a little bit, but it's such a slow burn in that first half of Act 2. I felt like the Bram Stoker movie from 1992 maybe took liberties and did something else with it, because my memories were not coinciding. I don't remember it really spending a lot of time with these interactions between these characters. Strangely enough, I knew they were primary characters, but they started to feel like side characters to me, and that was a very strange feeling. The Lucy character, strangely enough, became one of my favorite characters for a while, despite her being so hollow and one note. And it was kind of silly and almost comical that every man that came in contact with her like was so dedicated to the idea of loving her, right? And even when all of the things went down and she had chosen her husband, everyone else still had a very deep bond with Lucy. And that shows through with the development of her plot. And this is where I'm going to go into spoiler mode here. She's a sleepwalker, and so she stumbles upon Dracula, and Dracula is feeding off off of her, and she's getting weaker along the way. She's getting paler. Her teeth start to go sharper. She's fatigued, right? She just doesn't have any energy. And all the way through this, she's going through this whole pick a husband routine to the point where like one's chosen, but then she's weak and she needs blood transfusions. And so it's just every man around her ends up giving their blood to her, which of course Dracula drinks out of her and then euthafies himself. That's the correlation I made. But he basically took the blood of the men, and then that gave him more power than taking the blood of Lucy, which it was odd. Listen, there's misogynistic passages in this book. It was written in the 1800s, okay? But it's like sometimes these are train wrecks. You just get on for the ride, okay? I read into some of that subtext, and it came off more comical than it maybe should have been. But I wanted to love what was going on with the Lucy character and that whole transition. I wish it didn't last as long as it did, and I wish it wasn't as repetitive as it was. Like the fact that there was one blood transfusion, and then the next night it happens again, and so the second man has to do the transfusion, and then the next night it happens again, and the third man comes around and is able to do the transfusion, and then it happens again, and the fourth man gives blood for this transfusion, and it's all for naught. It's all for naught. It's still gonna end in shit because of some, again, shouldn't have been comical. But the way that this ended, it was just silly because Van Helsing basically does this routine to keep her room safe, right? Puts the garlic around her neck, puts garlic around the room, puts wafers and shit. Like, the place is protected. Like, nothing's getting in. She's not getting out. She feels at peace with the garlic around her. Everything's cool, man. Everything's great. And the men, like, they get to sleep. You know what I mean? And during the night, the mom goes into the room and she removes all of the garlic because of the scent and just to freshen the air. She opens the window. Bam. That's it. Everything's screwed. And then the wolf comes in and kills the mom with a heart attack. Look, I'm not spoiling everything. Because even that was like, wow, that was really quick. Now we lost the mom. Now Lucy has no reason to go on. Now we know it's too late. Now it's like, none of this needed to happen. That could have all been preventable. Like, how hard would it have been for just one of the men or all of them to just be around her while she slept? Maybe it was uncouth, but it would have saved her, okay? Or whatever the case might have been, they might have gotten to the answer a lot sooner. I just felt like it was just a tragic execution of the Lucy plot. It really spun me through a bunch of repetitious chapters that I wish could have gotten leaned down quite a bit. And it's not just in the narrative, it's how the men conveyed and expressed their love for her with every kind of routine. It felt like the same exact pattern happened with just 4 different characters. And that was really odd to me because all the signs were exactly the same. She was always more tired. She was always more pale. Her teeth were always getting sharper. It was the same goddamn pattern. And I wish it just moved on. Like I should be moving on. So the part I love, so at the midway point of the story, we get into the second half of Act 2 and I'm like, okay, now things are going to pick up. This is the worst that I could have gotten. So now we're going to get like, oh crap, like I don't remember Lucy being this creature now, like out there and doing her thing. And then you get this news article of like kids disappearing. I'm like, oh, here we go. Like this is the part I'm like, I don't remember this in a movie. This is going to be crazy. I have a faint memory of Lucy hunched over a child in the graveyard. I do have that one scene in my head, but like part of me was like, no, this could be substantial. And this could be the part I love because it got creepy again. They went to the tomb. She was there, then she was not, and she was there. And so Van Helsing has to convince Dr. Seward that vampirism is a thing, vampires are a thing, and because he's a man of science, to be able to like really learn more beyond knowledge, beyond logic, beyond objectivism, is you have to kind of expand your mind because it allows you to get the answers that shouldn't be answers. I guess that's what I took away from the whole monologue that Van Helsing was giving to Dr. Seward. And eventually he turns Dr. Seward around and now bam, now you got 2 people who are like, okay, vampirism is a real thing. But now we got to get the crew together because now Lucy is out there at night. Children are missing, but they get returned and they're kind of weak. And I'm like, you could have taken that so much further. It could have been so much creepier. And here's the thing. I started thinking like, is it part of the time? Like would the church have taken Bram Stoker aside and burned him at the stake if he had children dying in this book? But like, was that not allowed in his time? I'm not sure. I literally felt like there was something else holding him back. And the characters being very melodramatic, especially Van Helsing, around the dedication to God and expressing his love for Lucy and his honor to the men and friendship and stuff like that. Like him routinely calling on God and the word of God and all this, like it felt like it might have been also a little bit too heavy-handed. But knowing what I know from Gothic literature and vampirism in general, I have occult encyclopedias, I have vampire books and lore, I have there's a bunch of vampirism around the world, and so there's over the decades there's context to it that I was able to accept, because like one of the ideas of why crucifixes and wafers and holy water and all that stuff is effective against vampires, one angle that storytelling has taken around this vampire lore is that it's not so much the symbol that's used against a vampire, but the faith of the person wielding the symbol. That's the power of the symbol against the undead. And so I kind of got that from the way that Bram Stoker was writing Van Helsing in that manner, so that he was a man of science, but he was also a man of faith, and he was able to go into speculative territory in order to find answers that weren't immediately obvious. And that's what made him a specialist in this kind of stuff and allowed him to be a victor against the unholy. So I derailed. Derailed again. Let me look at my notes again. 28 minutes later. Jesus, I haven't looked at my notes once. Damn it. So they get the crew together and they bring a demise to poor Lucy in her vampiric state. Let me summarize all of this now, just so I can get my head on straight. Because they cut the head off. That was terrible. I didn't mean to do that. But I remembered the scene of, Okay, anyway. So the summary is that Lucy sleepwalking and the seduction by Dracula was very enticing as a initial plot point, but the repetition of her conditions worsening over time, but not truly escalating to a satisfying result, made the midpoint reveal of her death and transformation into the undead a little bit underwhelming. And then the potential of the missing children being connected to Lucy and us being able to explore Lucy's vampiric condition. I'm not sure how we would do that, because she would be writing the journals, but it could have been news articles, man. In any case, it was barely explored, and it was a missed opportunity to amp up the terror. That's what I have to say on that. And that moves us to my favorite character in the novel, side character, like through and through. That would be the madman Renfield. I love the scenes with this character. I love the exploration that we actually got to go on with this character. This was the only character that I believe had a multifaceted arc to their personality. There's just a moment that happens in the novel where he's desperate to get free, and there's a subtext going on there that I don't believe I caught being explicitly stated in the book. But when it happens, and then the event that happens after that, you correlate these two events and you realize why he was so desperate to get free was to at least attempt to save or intercept Dracula's final visit to Mina Harper, and then kind of making her drink of his blood, and then that becomes a problem because Mina is effectively going to be transforming. It's just a matter of time, and so they have to kill Dracula in order to remove the curse. But I felt like Mina had one interaction with Renfield where she left a mark on Renfield, and Mina's character, being as one note as all the other characters, her whole purpose to the story was to make men love her. So Renfield loved her, and in his own way, in his own mad way, but there's something about the evolution of this character. Him eating the flies, him eating the spiders, and then him begging to get a cat. And he had this devotion, this dedication to consume life in order to gain power was his whole thing. I forget if they called out, there was a term for this. I forget. I also don't think it was very clear whether or not he was getting this psychosis, this kind of mental breakdown because of Dracula's proximity was messing with him. I'm not sure. I feel like he was already a human who had this condition, and then Dracula kind of moving in, and as we learn, pretty close by. And I think that the aura of Dracula being close escalated his psychosis into this dark obsession about drinking life in order to gain power. But I don't think those were correlated. They just became distinctly correlated because of the parallels in the narratives between Renfield and Dracula. So I believe Stoker handled this development brilliantly, but I feel like the payoff, the final moment where Renfield invites Dracula in, again, I said I was going to be spoiling everything. The moment between those two characters interacting, Dracula promising that he's going to bring him a horde of rats that he can feed on the blood of, and of course this makes him go crazier because I'm going to get everything I wanted. It's all the power I need is the blood of those creatures, right? And then it was basically a lie. He gets invited in. Vampires need to get invited in the first time, and then they can kind of pass the threshold anytime after that, and that's kind of what compromises Mina later on. But once the direct interaction with Dracula and Renfield happen, there's kind of just a feud. There's Renfield being the mad person that he is. He feels like he's been betrayed and that he can overwhelm Dracula. He doesn't really understand. He calls him master and he worships him to some degree, and Dracula effectively asks him to worship him, and then he would give him all he wanted. But immediately after, that doesn't pan out for Renfield, and then Renfield freaks out, and then Renfield gets destroyed by Miss Dracula, a thunderstorm. I remember some description of thunderstorm, and then basically he's paralyzed. He's the back is broken, he's laying on the floor, he's not, Renfield's out of the picture, and it's man, that all happened in a paragraph. And it's I was so looking forward to wherever this was going to go, because I didn't even remember Renfield's storyline inside the movie. Kind of recall a man dying on the street, not in a cell, but in any case, I felt like it was underwhelming. Like, I just wondered what the entire point of the buildup of Renfield was for the character to only be used to let Dracula into the home. We got told that Dracula, after drinking the blood of Lucy after she had gotten the transfusions from the four men, that Dracula was DH'd. When they described him, when they spotted him on the street, the point I'm trying to make is like no one else would know what Dracula looked like. And so there's a bit of a plot hole where I feel like Dracula could have used his youthful charisma to get access to the home by some other shenanigans, you know? And it felt like Renfield got reduced down to the point of like being the crazy person that invites this mysterious figure in because they mentioned how vampires need to be invited in. And I'm like, it was just a bit of a lopsided execution, and I wish it was better. And he appeared fewer times than I wish he did. Oh, the part that I wanted to kind of call out why I thought the character was so brilliant. He's this madman for the entirety of the first half of Act 2, right? And we get to the second half of Act 2, and there's this moment where the four men go to see Renfield, and Renfield's psychology completely changes. He's extremely brilliant. He's talking in almost enlightened ways, and what I mean by like the philosophical meanderings with his dialogue and discourse with Van Helsing, and he kind of almost shows that he's actually a brilliant person underneath this mask of the madman. And you kind of get a bit of like, who is he really? Is he this brilliant person who's just like got into this fanaticism and became Renfield the madman? Or is it Renfield the madman? He's so mad that he's actually able to put on a character of brilliance. But like, where did he get the foundation of brilliance to have almost like equal level conversations with the doctors about things, like the ideas of things, you know? Like he had a promise of being so much more because he was so desperate to be free. And the why of why he wanted to be free, I don't believe was explicit. We sort of have to connect the pieces after a few chapters later when the whole interaction with Dracula and Renfield happened, and then he gets invited in, it was a lie, and then it gets destroyed. And then Mina, at that point, we know that was the access to Mina, and then bam. And then Mina being cursed becomes our plot mechanism to push the four men into the catalyst and then eventually bring Mina along. This takes me back to, again, part I really didn't like, which was the second half of Act 2, where Mina Harper is now cursed. The men have to go and find all of the boxes of dirt, Transylvanian dirt, that Dracula has hidden all across London in order to sleep the night and not be found. And so the men are like, well, we'll just find all the boxes, destroy them, right, with our processes, and then we're going to reduce it down to one. We're going to know which one he's going to go to, and then we're going to corner him, and bam, it's going to be done, right? And then in their brilliance, in their infinite wisdom as men, the rational superior to the emotional weaker sex. Listen, I'm just talking about what's written of this time, okay? I don't believe these things. I'm just saying that's why they become comical and they just become a train wreck. You just get on the ride, okay? But anyways, the point is the absurdity of the second half of Act 2, where there's so much time spent on this misogynistic narrative for then the four men to leave Mina alone when they know there's a vampire now. They all agree that vampires are real. They all know that vampirism is a thing. They all were part of Lucy's beheading and okay, so they're all aware that Dracula's nearby and pissed. Okay, so why did they leave Mina alone? She asked to come along, but they said no because you're just a woman. Listen, I'm paraphrasing. The irony is that the powerful, superior men did the most monumental F-up of them all because they're the ones who caused her demise. She would have been perfectly safe if she was part of the crew doing her thing. And maybe she wouldn't be perfectly safe. Maybe none of them could have been perfectly safe. The point is that they made her much less safe by leaving her behind. And then the plot sort of like, it sort of unraveled a little bit for me because of just how all of that played out and just how slow it all became, with me seeing how badly a train wreck it was because of the repetition again of the chapter by chapter reminder of these nights passing with all the men gone and Mina obviously going paler. And this is the part that bothered me, is that the men notice her obviously going paler. Like, this is a descriptor that happens every morning when the men get back. Every morning. None of you wanted to, in your infinite wisdom, none of you wanted to piece together that maybe we had a problem with Mina again, just like we had with Lucy. Maybe? No? Okay. Until you put a wafer on her head and it burns a scar into her forehead, and then, oopsie doopsies, I guess. That was weird. So I've meandered off my notes again. as I am. Did I say anything extra special about Renfield? I think I meandered into all of the pieces that I needed to. Yeah, decision to leave Mina unprotected while knowing Dracula was on the loose and a direct threat felt frustratingly absurd. That's my summary of that. It undermines the men's supposed competence and sacrifices the tension of the plot for convenience. And so that was not a bit of a disappointment. That was a great disappointment. That was probably the greatest disappointment, the second half of Act 2. Important points in my notes, though, is despite all of this, I was actually surprised about Mina's central role in the novel. I mean, if you've read a lot of Victorian fiction, it's very clear that women in particular are not written in the most prominent positions in the narrative. She's written very intelligent, and she effectively puts all the pieces together by retyping all of the diaries from the different characters or transcribing the God, what the hell is the name of that thing? The phonograph? Audio thing, right? And so she transcribed all this stuff and she created multiple copies, spread it across the men. So like it allowed us as readers to very rapidly understand that all of the 5 main characters were on the same page, because literally on the same page of Mina's retyped manuscripts of all of their stuff. So they effectively had this novel was effectively in their hands up until the last, I don't know, 50 pages where the novel ends. That's kind of how I understood it. And I thought that was a very cool take because it's just unlike Victorian fiction to put a female character in that kind of prominent role. I mean, Bram Stoker sort of kept repressing it, but in the repression, there were still like moments of like, yeah, but all the men were idiots and let this all happen. So it's like, that would have been like kind of a no-no. From my impression of fiction of those days, that was just a no-no. And I was pleasantly surprised that she had that big of a role inside the literature. So yeah, so that note is covered. Let's move on to the final act. So it promises this climactic showdown, right? Where all of these pieces are going to come to a head. They all got to get, like, there's one box left, but you know, Dracula's escaped. He gets onto this boat with some coins, and so now he's going to travel back to Transylvania. They got a couple weeks to get there, but Mina's got this curse, and she's going to transform if they don't kill Dracula in time. And you're like, oh my god, there's so many pieces moving at a slow crawl. It's so slow. It's so slow. We finally get to Transylvania. I'm like, okay, now shit's going to get real. Like, this is going to be crazy. And like, I didn't remember how the movie did it. It's funny because like, as I said that, I literally, not when I was reading this. When I was reading this, I wasn't thinking about the movie at all, strangely enough. Maybe because I was really tired and I was really trying to get into it. And I had to read parts of the ending, and I'll talk about those 2 parts soon. God, I'm going to derail again. I had to reread parts 2 or 3 times because I was like, I don't think I actually read what I think I read because I didn't catch it. Like, I don't know what I just read, but I felt like it was supposed to be epic, but it was like in a paragraph or like half of a paragraph. I'm like, one of them is like Van Helsing is in the area, and so he goes up against the 3 brides, which of course are from Act 1. And it was like a creepy ass scene with Jonathan Harker and the brides, and Dracula comes in and prevents like him getting messed up by the brides. And I'm like, oh man, they're still out there. So Bram Stoker ties that loose end up by like having Van Helsing go out there and like wreck them. But it's like it could have been something more. I'm like, did I miss some pages? Are pages missing from this novel at this point? Look at page numbers. I had to get up and walk around the house because it was already at past midnight. And I'm like, no. I must have missed pages where I dozed off, or I was like doing that thing where you're reading words, but you're not actually like retaining them. I was like, I gotta read this again. Because I feel like there's a lot of meandering, melodramatic talking to himself or something. But I'm like, I think he just killed something, but I'm not sure what he killed. And I was like, oh, the 3 brides, right? And then that kind of ends. And it's like, wait, so how does like, where are the other guys? Like, I got so confused. And because this happens so fast over a very few pages, I literally felt like I must have missed something a chapter ago, or like I just missed how it all came together. Like, there's this chase that happens where the gypsies are bringing this box of dirt with Dracula in it. They're bringing it to the castle. The other men intercept. And so there's like a kind of a fight in there, and it kind of gets crazy. Some cult action going on, some stabbies. And like poor Quincy gets messed up, and he's like, oh, I really wanted that character to have more of a role in this book, because every time he got mentioned as the kind of bold, courageous American, one of the suitors of Lucy, they all became friends. So it's all cool. They're all cool with each other. Quincy is like, oh no, that could have been cool. And the death was just like he got swiped by like a gypsy blade, and he had a final moment. He was like he was the final stabber of the heart part, right? When the head, like in the top. But that was the second part. I derailed again. I just want to be cohesive with these. God, I'm at an hour. I'm going to shorten this down for all of you, okay? The second part, before I derail, probably going to derail again, but it's going to be more. I'm getting to a point, just like just like this novel. It was not. This is longer than the novel takes to end. Oh Jesus. Okay, control yourself. Gather your thoughts. Let's try this again. The second part is how fast Dracula's death happens, because there's this chase with the gypsies, and you just heard me talk about that. And then by the time it's like the sun is going down, and so there's like this tension buildup of like, oh, we're gonna get like the last 10 pages are gonna be crazy. You know what I mean? Like, sun's gonna go down, he's gonna pop off out of this coffin, and I'm like, I don't remember this from the movie. So maybe the movie, I don't remember. Anyways, but then it's like, but maybe that's why I didn't remember even the movie, because it was flaccid. That was the word? I was trying to think of the word and it wasn't coming out fast. This is derailing so poorly. Listen, I was coming off of wishing that Van Helsing's destruction of the brides was more exhilarating than it was. And then I was expecting a major confrontation, final climax battle between the heroes and the iconic villain that has been given to us for over a century. And what do I get? The final confrontation with Dracula? Killed in a box of dirt. That's it. The novel is done. That's it. That's how it ends. The build-up deserved to be intense. It deserved it. I feel like I'll give you some final thoughts, because I feel like I didn't achieve what I wanted to achieve when I sat down an hour ago to record this review. I want to be not monotone, but like I wanted to deliver you a review that was reasonable, was well thought of, had a short script that probably would have taken 5 minutes to read. But instead, you got a derailed conversation about a book that I really wanted it to be like if not one of my favorite books of all time, like the favorite book of all time, because of how old the memory of wanting to love this book was deep inside. You have no idea. I could go on about how much this novel had influenced me as a teenager before I had even read the book. One of the first things I ever wrote was a play for the high school called Within a Dead Heart. I was in university at the time. It won an award even. So I got an award around here somewhere. I unpacked it. The point is, I was very proud about that because I was 19 when I wrote that script. And it wasn't about Dracula, but it was about two vampire brothers and this dichotomy between good and evil and stuff like that. Anyways, I'm not going to derail here. The point is, it influenced me that early on in my life before I had finished reading the book. And I finally read it 3 decades later, and I was underwhelmed. And I was like, this can't be a 3 out of 5. I really refused to believe that this was a 3 out of 5. But then I remembered the parts I really enjoyed, you know? And it's like, I didn't just enjoy them, like I really enjoyed them. Even the parts with Lucy, the one-note kind of character that she was, and the repetitious cycle of her whole development, it bothered me, but I really enjoyed the idea of it and the execution of the parts that were good. Like, again, it's almost like my imagination is maybe giving this a half point more than it should be getting, you know? But at the same time, I adored the first act. I really wish that was the entire book. Like, I wish the rest of it just didn't exist. Literally, I wish it didn't exist. I wish it would remove, like, in my book is like over 500 pages, almost 600 pages. I wish it would have removed like 400 pages, and it probably would have been an amazing 5 out of 5 book for me. God, what are my notes for the actual final thoughts instead of me just meandering? You know what? I sort of hit all of these points. This would have been way more cohesive, but hopefully you liked my more organic, transparent expression of thoughts along the way. This is why I never write scripts, man. It's a waste of time. Like, I should just have bullet points and just run with it, because like I was intimidated to record this, and it took me 4 hours to turn on the camera and go for it. Like, I wasn't even gonna do it. I was just gonna go to bed and think about it tomorrow, but then I'm like, oh, then what? It'd be the weekend. Like, I had to do it. And then once I started going, I remembered all the parts. Like, I remembered all the emotions I had. So I read the first part in one sitting. The first, maybe it was 100 and a bit pages, but then I read the last 450 or so pages of a 600 page book in about 3 days. Yeah, Saturday, Sunday, and Monday, and I was going to record this yesterday, which would have been a Tuesday. Tonight is Wednesday, by the way. So like, it's still relatively fresh, but I felt like I wouldn't have had my thoughts put together, and obviously, clearly, I did not for this kind of review. Will I do more reviews like this? I guess I will if this does well. I just don't know how to approach reviews because I don't want them to be boring. It gets intimidating because I'm like, am I going to say something that everyone else is already saying? Am I going to say stuff that's just so kind of off the mark that I'm going to sound like a buffoon or like a crazy, like a Renfield? I never feel confident about what I take away from certain reading, but that being said, reading is subjective, you know what I mean? And I think we all take away different things. Like, I've definitely read a couple books this month where I was like, and I saw some of the ratings on Goodreads, and I was like, I don't think that was a 5. And so I kind of get it. If even my 4 out of 5 doesn't really land with some folks who remember things from the book of what they hated and what they liked. And by all means, please share it in the comments below if you have read this novel. I'd like to hear what you remember, and if you've read it recently, does anything I'm saying sound like it's like maybe I read it wrong? Like, don't know why that's how I would word it. But I feel like maybe I read something wrong or I was tired through some parts and I don't feel confident. I'm going to be reading a bunch of Goodread reviews after this just to see what other people were saying. I've avoided all of it because I didn't want to get my own review tainted or whatever this was. I don't think this was a review, was it? I'm just saying, I don't even know how to write reviews, okay? Like, I just, I have ideas and thoughts, but I think about things in 4 parts, like I said, up front. That's a natural exercise I do, whether I'm watching a movie or watching a TV show or reading a comic or reading a novel or reading, like, it doesn't matter, like, or playing a video game. I like to understand what the writer is trying to do at these different parts of the storytelling flow, because then it helps me understand what they're trying to say in subtext. I get to think about the characters in a different way. I get to speculate along the way. I get to have this push and pull with my reading experience that allows me to absorb things as memories. They become deeper memories. And I think that's what happened with this book, is because I was having these moments of like, fuck, this really doesn't fit here. Like, it's so slow. Like, I feel like I need to be at a different part of the pacing here, but I feel like I'm going in reverse. And so all of those things give me something to talk about from my own kind of perspective that I could bring to reviews. Reviews, I'll put that in quotes until I don't know if these are reviews, okay? These are thoughts, these are my impressions, I guess. As a wrap up, I mean, to me, this is a soft recommendation because a 4 out of 5 for me, it's better than an okay. A 3 out of 5 is okay. A 3 is not bad in my world. It's okay. It's okay, But a 4 out of 5 is like, it was good. I would recommend this to people, but with caveats. You know what I mean? Like, are you interested in reading Gothic horror and seeing how books might have been written in the mid to late 1800s, right? Are you interested in seeing how the vampire lore came to be? Like, where there was earlier books in this, by the way. I've read some of them. Anyway, we can get into it in a different vlog. But strangely enough, I read those before I read Dracula. Maybe because I was really intimidated by the size of this book. That might have been what happened. Doesn't matter. Okay, let's move on. Like, if you're curious about that more slow, methodical, psychological storytelling that uses words to convey a lot of that atmosphere that messes with your emotions, like, it's just different than modern audience storytelling. You know what I mean? Like, you're not going to get the monster doing crazy things along the way and being overt about it and having these explicit combat gore scenes, like, to really spike up the adrenaline. It's just, no, everything is more like it's what could be. When people say, like, with horror movies, it's like it's best to not show the monster because your imagination makes the monster worse than it is when it actually reveals itself on the screen. It's sort of that feeling with Gothic horror, which is why I love Gothic horror literature. I believe Edgar Allan Poe is probably one of the best in the craft, but I would like to maybe reread them. I have a collection. I've always been meaning to go into Poe, so maybe I'll do that on the channel as well. But I drool. Like, he's just, for me, he's got the perfect cadence of storytelling for that era of storytelling. Lovecraft had it to some degree, but it's a whole different type of craft. Robert E. Howard from the Conan stories also had a craft, but it's not the same. We're kind of exiting that kind of era of storytelling and going to the 30s, the pulp era, and there's a different sort of storytelling that starts to evolve and come out of that. But all 3 of those are kind of built on the shoulders of the Draculas, of the Mary Shelley Frankensteins, of the literature of that time, and it's just a part of that evolution. And so if you're curious about the history of literature, then yeah, that's where it would be that soft recommend, right? Just go for it. I mean, it is a bit of a long book and it does drag for about 60-70% of it, but maybe you'll come out of it finding nuggets of gold that I came out of it thinking of a whole story that I could tell was just Renfield. So yeah, it doesn't follow modern conventional storytelling, especially not horror storytelling. There's a lot to love here if you can appreciate the novel's strengths and look past its weaker elements, as I hope I conveyed, not clearly, but clearly enough in this vlog impressions review, whatever you want to call it. Should I have like a post-credits thoughts? I will. I mean, if you want to end here, you're free to go. Thank you for watching this long. So for those of you stuck around, I'm going to give you some post-review thoughts I've had since reading this public domain book. Keywords, public domain. Like, I came out of reading this, and because I've gotten into exploring the use of AI in a writer's toolkit, I started looking at a book like this and started wondering, man, I just have this notepad going right in Google Keeps where I'm going to be adding public domain Dracula rewrite. And it's literally something where you could probably do it as an exercise, but it would be tedious, and then why aren't you writing your own stuff? But this would be one of those examples where it's in the public domain, and it could be an exercise that I take AI through for me to explore AI's possibilities. So if I were to ask the AI, for example, to review chapter 1 as an editor with modern storytelling conventions and sensibilities, what would they say? What would be their feedback? The AI would provide you feedback in the context of a modern review or with modern sensibilities and stuff like that. And then you could take that review and you could rewrite the journals in this book in a different way that maybe gets rid of some of the stuff that becomes repetitive and redundant, the parts that really bothered me. You could give it entire chapters and say, like, what parts of this are redundant? Like, how do you streamline what happened in these 4 chapters, right? You can maybe turn them into 1 chapter. Like, can you rewrite some of the characters so that they are more fleshed out? They have more nuance to them, right? They're sprinkled through the story in different parts. Stuff like the news articles and the missing children. Like, can you expand on that a little bit more, right? And you can flesh something out like this in significant ways. Hell, you could flesh something out like this in the language of Bram Stoker, because you could feed this entire thing to AI and it would pick up the nuance of the Bram Stoker's writing style and it would try to replicate that. It's not going to be amazing, right? But that's why you're there as a writer. You can review it after and then you can do your own revisions on top of it to get it somewhere that you feel like would be a better take of this book. That's maybe controversial and sacrilege to say for a classic of this stature, but I'm just saying it's been around long enough. And clearly this is not written for modern audience's appreciation, and I feel like as a staple, oh man, this is the kind of project I might take on as a side project. So that's my end vlog kind of bonus material, because it's something I really want to contemplate. And if it's not that idea, the second idea I had in my head, I just seed it a little bit earlier on, was the idea of like taking a different character's perspective, like a Renfield, and going, what would this story sound like if it was just Renfield's story? Man, it'd be shorter. That's for sure, but I would like to explore, like, when he goes into that high intelligence mode, I'm like, was that from before? Like, how do we explore that a little further and really flesh out what this character could have been and get into the mind of this? Like, I mean, he wasn't a serial killer, but he had the capacity of to be a serial killer, because of his like obsession with blood being the source of life and power and stuff like that. But when it all really comes down to it, I should have put this in the review part of the video, is like when he's having the intellectual dialogue with Van Helsing about life and taking human life, he doesn't want to do that. He had a limit that was reached, but it wasn't super explicit for us to really take something away that was, oh man, that was more powerful, I feel. Like, we just knew that there was a wall there. I wish there was more exploration into what that meant, instead of it just being like part of the psychosis, He wanted the blood because blood was life and blood was power, but not at the cost of the thing losing its soul. The extension of that possibly meaning that animals, from Renfield's perspective, do not have souls, and that's a pretty common perspective. I know that I've read plenty of philosophical papers that suggest otherwise, and subjectively or emotionally, people believe our cats and dogs do have souls. Indeed, they go to doggy heaven and kitty heaven. But like, not derail again. But yeah, I love that part of that facet of the character. That again, I wish it was explored. Or is there a retelling? That's a third idea, right? I'm sure plenty of retellings exist out there, right? But is there a retelling of this that tries to stay true to parts of this, but explored in different ways? Do we have like a way of exploring what maybe the life inside the castle might have been like? How about the gypsies that have some sort of honor-bound relationship with Count Dracula, right? Was that paid, or is there a longer history there? What's the story with the 3 brides? Like, can we go further into that? Where do they come from? What eras did they come from? Could you imagine the stories you could tell from their perspectives? Like, maybe they've been dead too long that they've lost their humanity, and so all of those, that the history's gone. But we're in a scenario where, like, man, I don't think so. Like Dracula had a whole library of books, which is basically the tracking of all the history that went down. Like, what kind of books might have been in that library, right? That would have like had him cross through the ages. Now again, if he's Vlad Tempest, and I think there was a mild reference of him being the Impaler, Vlad Tempest. I think I caught something at one point, but I wasn't very, very clear. I felt it was mildly ambiguous. I'm not sure. Maybe I took something away. They were going through all these different vampires across countries and ages and stuff like that, and there being a possibility that it was all him is maybe what I took away. Look, I kind of don't remember. I'm derailing. This would be a controversial topic for folks, but this is just my way of looking at things like this now in the public domain and seeing AI as an opportunity to give products like these a whole new life for a whole new audience with a whole new set of sensibilities. Anyways, that's it. Those are my final thoughts. Catch you in the next one, whatever they might look like or be, or maybe they'll be like a normal review. Catch you there. Peace. That was very long.